Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Mayor de Blasio has made it clear that immigration reform is one of his administration's top priorities. And he proved that commitment when he appointed Nisha Agarwal, Commissioner of his Office of Immigrant Affairs. She's my guest today, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Tell me about this office. Is this, I think it's a charter-mandated office?
It is. It became a chartered office in 2001, and really we're the bridge between City Hall and New York City's many diverse immigrant communities. And we have the mission of promoting programs and policies that support the well-being of immigrant communities.
And that spans really the whole government, doesn't
it? The whole government. Really, you know, immigrants, they're foreign-born New Yorkers are more than 3 million people in New York City.
We have 3 million people who are foreign-born.
Right. And that's, you know, larger than the size of the city of Chicago. So immigrants and immigration is a core part of what New York City is.
Do you happen to know how many we have of people whose parents were foreign-born?
So the foreign-born are about 3 million, and then when you add their children,
Yeah.
it's 60% of New York City.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing.
It's a radical change.
Yes.
Because it wasn't too long ago when most of the immigration came from Europe, right?
Right, exactly. And
now-
we're really seeing, especially in the latter half of the 20th century, a huge diversification of who's coming to New York and who's coming to the United States in general.
So how does it break down?
So probably about half are Latino, sort of Spanish-speaking, a quarter Asian, a quarter sort of range of other groups, you know, Middle Eastern, African, et cetera.
And then they change the look of the city, don't they? Because it's so interesting to see these new communities develop.
Oh, yes.
Is it that somebody knows somebody, there was a pioneer?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's, and then it, you know, it travels through
Yeah.
the chain back to the home country. I mean, we in New York have some of the largest populations outside of the home country of some groups, like
Yeah.
the Guyanese. It's amazing that New York becomes the second home to the world in many ways.
Right, it's incredible. So I'm fascinated because on your website, the website of your office, which is what,
.gov/immigrants.
Immigrants. You translate into, I think, 37 languages.
We do. We could do a better job of that across city government,
yeah.
and that's one of the things my office is focused on.
And how many languages do you think are spoken in this city?
Oh, more than 150,
Yeah.
almost 200. I mean, there's a lot.
We always look at that one district in Queens that has, what, 100 and, I don't remember, something like that.
Yeah.
But when you say that the languages and the translation and all of that is so important, that's partly your background. I mean, you did an astonishing job, right?
Oh, well, I don't know if I would characterize it that way, but my first campaigns working with community-based organizations in New York were around removing language barriers, especially in healthcare, but also within city government agencies. And so that's something I'm very passionate about. I think if you are monolingual English, it's hard to imagine what it's like to navigate the complexity of the city, of the healthcare system, speaking a different language. And you know, people should be able to understand their medications. They should be able to understand what their physicians or a city worker is saying without, you know, seamlessly in the same way that English speakers can. And so that work really, I think, informs now what I'm doing from the government role in trying to make language barriers go away.
But you're an attorney, you're a lawyer.
I am.
Did you pass the bar?
I did pass the bar.
But you chose to go into really public service.
Yes, it's what I went to law school to do. It's, you know, having this tool of legal training to really be able to help people, whether it's an individual representation or thinking about how do we, you know, there's enforcing the rules and then there's changing the rules so they work better for people. And that's really the area I've been focused on is in policy. How do we get under the hood of a policy idea and really make the law work for people?
So where were you working when you did the prescriptions, the drugs?
I was at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest in the health justice program there and partnered with Make the Road New York to really pass the first law in the country in New York City to ensure interpretation and translation in pharmacies. And then that sort of caught fire in other parts of the country as well, so it's really exciting.
So who regulates that?
So that's actually the Department of Education because they are the ones who regulate the professions. And so at the state level, we worked with the Department of Education, and then at the local level, it's the Department of Consumer Affairs that has responsibility for enforcing the law that passed.
It is so difficult to just maneuver yourself through some of these agencies. I've always thought, if you really have to go through HRA for some kind of support, or if you're a domestic violence victim, or if you're looking for housing, how can you ever maneuver through this? So do we now have interpreters at every agency?
So the agencies typically have bilingual staff who they'll use, but also have interpretation services. So you can do that over the phone, or sometimes it can be through video conference. There are a number of different ways in which you can ensure interpretation services. And our job is really to help agencies figure out what modality works best for them. So inspector in the field might need a different tool than a caseworker sitting in an office, but both should have the tools they need to communicate with the clients that they're working with.
And in New York City, when we talk about the clients or immigrants, we don't draw a line, do we, whether people have the proper papers or not?
Not at all. And in fact, when I'm in the community, there are two messages that I make sure are communicated. One, your immigration status doesn't matter, especially if you're trying to access health care, if you're trying to access public safety. In New York City, we don't care about immigration status, and we'll keep it confidential, strictly confidential. Same is true for language barriers, that you should be able to communicate with government in a language that you understand. Those are the two most important messages I think immigrant communities in New York need to know.
Does this go to tuition in colleges?
So unfortunately, the state did not pass the DREAM Act last year.
Well, it's the DREAM Act that gets involved.
Yes, and that's at the state level, but the mayor has been supportive of the DREAM Act all along, and we're hopeful we'll see maybe a resurgence of that in the next legislative cycle. Did
you get particularly interested in the question always of immigration?
Yes and no. So as a law student...
Was it a personal reflection?
It was partly a personal reflection. My family, my parents immigrated from India, and I grew up in upstate New York, which was not, didn't have a lot of immigrant families, didn't actually have a lot of diversity when I was growing up. So that definitely politicized me and made me interested in these issues. But I really came at it initially from a civil rights focus, and actually a lot of the laws that underpin language access are really based in civil rights law. Sort of the connections between historically the civil rights movement and now the immigrant rights movement, I think, are what my background was and what my passion was. And so I did a lot of healthcare, civil rights work, including immigrant health work. And then when I shifted to doing work at the national level with the Center for Popular Democracy, I started doing more kind of straight up immigration work and then landed here.
So when we have non-discrimination legislation, do we include as a category immigrants?
Yes and no. So take something like Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which was passed in 1964. That prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. And the Supreme Court has interpreted national origin to include language. So that's where the sort of provisions of interpretation and the need to provide interpretation and translation really come about.
So that's very lucky.
Yes, it's very lucky, and it's, the rationale behind it is really kind of a nice one. When Title VI was first sort of before Congress, John F. Kennedy, who was president at the time, said it's simple justice that people who are taxpayers paying into the system should not be then excluded from participating and receiving the services of government on equal terms. So that's the theory here. Whether it's your racial background or it's your national origin, you shouldn't feel like you're excluded from the services that you're supporting.
That's true. Now, there are people, though, who are turned over to ICE.
Yes.
How does that happen? ICE being the immigration, what's it called? ICE?
Immigration Customs Enforcement. So this is all really, I think, some of the escalation in deportations really happened in the post 9/11 period. And one thing that happened is the federal government created this program called Secure Communities. And the way Secure Communities works is if an individual is arrested, and it could be for something very minor, their fingerprints are shared with the FBI, that's kind of common practice, but also now, because of Secure Communities, shared with immigration. And so if there's some reason to believe that they might be in the country unlawfully, immigration can sometimes tell local law enforcement to hold a person for a period of time so that they can come and get them. Even if the person ultimately gets released, they're not convicted, they can still get trapped in the throes of deportation. In New York City, there have been laws in the past to limit the extent to which that happens, and it's been in the mayor's platform to continue to sort of expand that. We want to be a safe city for immigrants. So, the goal is not to help support the deportations.
That's what I was going to ask you. And it's interesting, too, isn't it, that New York City has received a large number of immigrants who crossed the border and were arrested just recently, and they're here. And I don't think people realize that, right?
Well, there's been an increase in the number of children in particular that are coming from Central America. They're fleeing really quite horrific conditions, and they're actually arriving at the border and turning themselves in because they see arrival in the United States as safety in a way that they didn't have at home. And
so most of them are asylum seekers.
Most of them are asylum seekers. I mean, probably technically they're refugees, but we're not treating them that way. What happens is then they're put in federal custody, and then the federal government actually tries to identify relatives or family friends who can take them in. And we have many families that are in that situation now here in New York who are sort of sponsors of these children who've come from these Central American countries.
So, and then do they then come and seek, some of them I'm sure, could come and seek some kind of special assistance for different things?
So there's a special docket that's been created in the immigration court to hear these kids' cases. The legal services providers we have are amazing, and they've really been stretching themselves to be able to at least give these kids an initial screening to see if they have a claim for legal relief to remain in the country.
But do families come to you or come to HRA for additional support or rental money or that kind of thing?
Yep, so as soon as this issue emerged, the city agencies, including us, got together to say, how can we assist these families? They're going to be coming to us, how can we connect them to services? So they're enrolling kids in school, they're enrolling to get health services to ensure that the kids, both their mental health and physical health needs are taken care of. And we've really been working to provide coordinated support for these kids. Our city agencies are fantastic that way.
So this city, as it should be, must be known as a friendly city.
Yes, yes, I sure hope so, and we're working hard to make it even friendlier.
Do you work with other cities?
We do, actually. We work with lots of the other cities are starting to have, after New York, mayor's offices of immigrant affairs. And so we're in touch with LA and Chicago, and there's a Seattle mayor's office, and Nashville recently started a kind of small immigrant affairs office. So there's a real movement across the country to lift these issues up.
Now, one of the greatest things that you're doing is designing, I guess, and implementing the ID, the identification for undocumented people.
Yes.
How do you do that?
Yes. So
and what did I miss in that?
Yes.
sentence?
So the important thing is that, so the mayor announced his support for the creation of an ID card in the state of the city in January. And then the city council recently passed a law, and the mayor signed it into law on July 10th, which is exciting. This is a card for all New Yorkers, both those who already have documents as well as those who may not, because of their immigration status, be able to get a state driver's license. But our goal is really to have all New Yorkers sort of supporting this card, having this card, sort of having it be their membership.
You know, I think for your advertising, my husband is sometimes known as Mr. New York. He's a journalist. And he has no identification. The only identification, because he's never driven a car in his life.
Right.
So the only identification he has is a lapsed journalism, press card. So he can really come down and get one of those.
He
It'll
should.
be very important.
He should definitely do that. And it's so interesting.
He got turned away, incidentally, from one of these emergency medical systems because we didn't have any photo ID for them.
And that's a common story in New York.
Yes.
Half of New York City residents don't have a New York State driver's license. Because
amazing.
Very few of us need to drive.
Yeah.
And so that's the target audience, is the range of different people who might want to benefit from this card.
Yeah. So now how are you going to do it?
So how are we going to do it? We're working very hard. We're planning to launch in January. And we're designing the card right now. We're thinking about we really want this card to be a key to the city. So what are some of the benefits that we can connect to the card that'll make it appealing across the board? How can we ensure that the card is accepted at buildings and city buildings and for city services? Those are all the conversations we're having right now.
Or even apartment, business, offices.
Right.
We've gone into offices and Jimmy has no ID and he gets into an argument. My face is my ID. I mean, it's such crazy nonsense. But how are you going to give them out?
So we're going to have a range of different walk-in enrollment opportunities, mainly through the libraries, but also through places like the Department of Finance, business centers that'll be located in all 5 boroughs. And in addition, we're going to have mobile pop-up sites for enrollment in those neighborhoods that don't have a kind of physical, permanent walk-in site. And individuals will just have to come in and they'll have to have some document that shows they are who they are. So I know you're Ronnie Eldridge, and then to prove that
how do they get, what is that?
It could be a broad range of different documents. We're actually right now going through the rulemaking process, and so there's going to be a public hearing on October 8th where we're gonna, the rules already lay out, here are some of the initial documents we're thinking about. People could provide other suggestions for things that might make sense in terms of identity, but then you also should prove residency. And that's like when you get your library card, you have a phone bill or a water bill or whatever to show that you live in New York City. You have those two things, you fill in your application, they take your picture, and then the card is mailed to you a couple of weeks later after the application's been reviewed. That's it. And it's free.
That's so great. It will make a big difference, won't it?
Yes.
How many people do you estimate? Are you hoping, do you have a goal?
We do and we don't have a goal. So our, I think, and I've been setting an ambitious goal for myself, is that in 5 years, if we have 1 million people in New York City who have this municipal ID, that's a success from my perspective. And so we're hoping to get the word out as broadly as we possibly can.
What are some of the other things that you would like to accomplish?
Something I've been really passionate about is this issue of access to justice for immigrant communities. You know, whether you're undocumented or you're a green card holder and just one step away from citizenship, there's a lot of different things the city can do to support you kind of moving down that pathway to citizenship, and really thinking through what our role is in that. If the president announces some sort of executive action, New York City is going to have to be ready, and one of the ways in which we're going to have to be ready is knowing how people are going to connect to good information about what they're eligible for. It's transformative for people's lives economically to move from being undocumented to having some sort of stability in terms of immigration status. There are a lot of people in New York who might be in that position, and my goal is to figure out how we can help them.
Do people who are arrested and then convicted of a crime and sent, we'll say they're sent to Rikers Island, so they're only it's less than a year, do they automatically get referred to ICE?
They don't. So as I mentioned before, there are some laws in place that limit the extent to which we're cooperating with ICE in terms of turning them over. So there's a whole sort of complex set of rules around that right now, and we're hoping to expand them even further.
But the state not having one of these things, it makes it more difficult, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And are you lobbying in Washington?
A little bit. You know, I've been going down to Washington for some meetings and things like that, and we're waiting to hear what will happen from the federal government. But really the focus has been what New York City can do as we're sort of waiting for the federal government to act to make us not only the most friendly city, but also a kind of proof of concept that you can be pro-immigrant and the sky won't fall. Quite the contrary, you can actually have a thriving economy and a thriving community like New York.
How can people be anti-immigrant? I mean, how can that happen?
I'm not the right person to ask that question.
It is amazing, isn't it?
New York City, I mean, the best thing about my job is I get to travel to all these different neighborhoods. And you'll have like a taqueria next to a Polish shop next to, and people are mixing together and interacting and making it work. And I wish if everybody could see the way New York functions, I think it would change the conversation nationally.
Even part of New York sees how other parts of New York function.
Exactly.
I mean, it's such an amazing, interesting thing. You know, years ago we had a friend, my parents, a woman who was a Quaker, and she used to have what she called parandas, and they were dinners where people from different cultures, backgrounds came. And she was called to testify before the Joseph McCarthy's committee when he was looking for communists. That's how they looked at people who were pro other cultures. It's so astonishing because we've really, in a way, many people think we haven't come as far as, well, we know we haven't come as far, but from where we started. And it's just fascinating to me when people are suspicious or worried. Do you think that it's also the job, does it fit into the traditional racism that we have?
I think there is an element of that, certainly. I mean, I think that there's concern about the new and the different, and it does take, a kind of, it can sometimes be racially coded. I also think it's possible to overcome some of those dynamics. We've seen trends, actually, there's some groups, there's a national group called Welcoming America that actually focuses on cities that are transitioning, where they're seeing new immigrant populations and encouraging them to be welcoming communities. And their focus is not just on the immigrant communities, but also on the what are called receiving communities, or the sort of long-standing community members who've been in some of these cities. And you can see some real positive change in places like Dayton, Ohio, and others where the demographic transition is newer, more recent. And that gives me hope that we can kind of transcend some of the kind of initial prejudgments that people have about folks from other parts of the world. across the country, but it's slow work, and sometimes the loudest voices are the most anti-immigrant voices, and we need to figure out how to drown them out or at least balance them out.
Right. Are people more afraid of different people?
I'm not. It's hard to say. I'm not really a social psychologist to know if that's kind of scary to people. There's been really interesting work on implicit bias that some researchers have done, that even if you don't think it, you might have certain opinions about certain types of people or people who look a certain way. But their goal in doing that research is to figure out how can you bring it to the surface, expose it for what it is, which is just a kind of preconceived notion that can go away, and then how do you overcome it? And so I think that's interesting work that could help answer some of these questions.
When the children come and they're non-English speaking and they go to school, what happens? Do they get assigned to a school that's bilingual, or do they? What happens?
So the school system has a robust English language learner program, and so the idea is to both help kids kind of get on par with their education, kind of regardless of language, and then eventually be able to bring the kids into kind of full English.
So they go into an ASL?
Yeah.
But in the past, we've had difficulty providing enough spaces for adults who want to study. Do we still have that problem?
We definitely still have that problem. There's been an expansion, a sort of increased financial support for those programs, but there's clearly far more need than there is seats still. In the past, my office has done some creative programs around kind of video-based learning, where there are kind of episodes, TV episodes you can watch of people sort of speaking English and around a certain theme, and then there will be discussion groups where people will use that episode as a kind of English conversation practice session. And I think we need to figure out creative strategies like that to kind of expand English language learning.
What agency do those programs come under? English second.
So it was through, so it's the Department of Ed does most of the programs.
Higher education?
At the
CUNY?
I'm not sure at the state level, actually, but
Or
it's
city?
City level, it's Department of Education. And I believe the Department of Youth and Community Development also funds some programs like that.
Right. So, but that's important, isn't it?
Oh, it's hugely important. It's hugely, and I personally find, I went to a number of different graduations for English language classes. It's really inspiring how hard people work with 2 jobs and then they go to their English language class because they know what it means for them economically and in terms of integration to the broader city.
The community-based organizations, are they empowering the immigrant groups to develop their own?
Yes. So I think, New York City is really quite an incredible example of grassroots base building, groups that are really from the neighborhood, building a membership base, developing leaders who then are actually representing the interests and the needs of their community, not just in terms of developing service programs, but actually advocating at City Hall and really driving an agenda in a meaningful way. I think the City Council you see now, the mayor's office that you see now, the kind of progressive values of the city that exist right now are really a testament to that hard work at the grassroots level that groups have been doing.
You said earlier you worked with Make the Road, and that of course is a wonderful organization. And then more recently you were were you co-founder also of the Center for American Popular Democracy. It's a little difficult.
Yes.
And that's an amazing organization.
Yes.
So does that put you in touch across the country with?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and that was so helpful to get a sense of the kind of national landscape around community organizing and community activism. And so I think I bring a lot of those relationships and that experience into this job. It's very helpful.
So to be a public servant, really in the A++ category, you really should be a community organizer, shouldn't you? Have that
totally
experience.
agree.
And you have to depend on a lot of those community organizations to be able to help you move your agendas forward.
Oh yeah,
right?
and our, this administration, kind of Mayor de Blasio comes from,
that movement,
that orientation. And so what we've been really striving to do is be more open and be more transparent and engage those very community organizations in municipal ID, in language access, in whatever programs it is that we're working on, because they're the ones who are going to ensure that the programs work well when they're on the ground.
And as they work well and develop more and more, they'll also start running candidates and participating more. Do you happen to know how many members of the City Council are bilingual?
Oh, That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty high percentage, but I don't know the exact number. It's something we should figure out.
Right. So are you as enthusiastic or more enthusiastic since you had this job?
If such a thing is possible, I think I'm actually more enthusiastic. It's a really exciting time to be in New York. I love working for this mayor. I love feeling like we're actually making progress towards big goals. We've set ambitious goals for ourselves, but we're meeting them. I mean, the launch of universal pre-K, it's so inspiring. You know, this is this thing that people said you could never do, and now we have so many kids that are getting access to kindergarten that didn't have it before.
So will those kids really just develop the language as they go along?
Yes.
That's an amazing, I never thought of that. That's an amazing thing, isn't it?
It's amazing. And I mean, next year it'll be truly universal, 70,000 4-year-olds going to pre-K, and that's transformative for their lives.
And then as they go into kindergarten, they're much more, that's really quite amazing.
It's quite amazing. Yeah. So seeing things like that really are motivating, and I think a sign that you can, it's sort of progressive government in the original sense of the word progressive, right? Government that works, government that does well by people who are its constituents.
Let's just tell people again your website.
Sure, www.nyc.gov/immigrants.
Well, immigrants are lucky. We're all lucky to have you there. Thank you so much, Nisha. Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.